WNST of flying pucks in the backside of the mud of Old Hilltop at Pimlico, and the Orioles off to the Windy City to see who sucks more, the Chicago White Sox or the Orioles, the battle for last place, or as they call it at Masson, fifth place. This guest of mine is one of my favorite guests to have on. I mean, honestly, every time I call him, I wonder why I don't bug him more often. He has been a friend of mine for 2 decades and was one of my compadres and one of the good residue that came from my time at 101 Sports and Sporting News at the turn of the century, where I didn't live in Chicago, but I hung out in Chicago a lot. This guy made life easier and was found on my porch a few Monday mornings on the East Coast from time to time in White Marsh. We welcome Jim Litke back on, decorated Associated Press sports columnist, doing a podcast now, back from one set of Olympics, and you're following my heart and not my passport, Jim Litke. You're going to Russia next month, and you are doing Da World Cup, right? I mean, look at this. You're look, man, any more association with this, they're going to be investigating you going back and forth to Russia like this, man.
Well, I'm pretty sure they're investigating me already, because I got to tell you, it took about 3 weeks and $200 in what was supposed to be a $30 transaction fee to get my Russian visa. So
that's a lot of rubles.
Yeah, they're a little aggravated with us right now. I heard if you're a fan, you basically buy a ticket. You have to go through a background check. You get a fan ID and you're in. But they made those of us who were supposed to be working there. Every place I've been in the last 10 years, which took me about an hour to figure out, they actually asked the question, have I ever been in an armed conflict? I had to say no, but I've thought about it a few times.
But I do live in Chicago, is probably what you should say, right?
I think that pretty much should have got me in just, without any trouble at all.
It reminds me of the old Stripes joke, right? Chicago, bang, bang, right? The old, Ramis and Bill Murray back in the day. Look, I called you because the White Sox stink and the Orioles stink, and I definitely want to get into the gambling thing and talk about your podcast and what's going on, but boy, the baseball side of this, of the offseason, you were much closer to the game 2.5 decades ago, back in the days of Lords of the Realm and collusion and all of that. And I know at heart you got a lot of baseball, and I've seen you here at horse racing. You're kind of old school in that way. But, boy, the death of baseball in my community, it is like a Springsteen song in Asbury Park. You know what I mean? It's like it brought a death to my hometown. I mean, there's no one going to the games. There's no buzz at all. They're going to Chicago. And I know they're getting written up out there, but I mean, the Orioles tried. They spent some money. The White Sox have gone into this, we're going to deal Sale away, and, for the home where my cousin's statue sits gathering dust out in center field at Comiskey, it's tough times on the south side, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. The problem with the White Sox is that they spent about most of the last decade basically saying that they were going to retool. They were going to add a piece here and there, and it wasn't a realistic approach. The reason baseball is dying in some communities and making a fortune in others is because it's become a game where you got to spend a lot of money to make some money. You really got, so the Sox are finally looking at a total revamp. In other words, they sold off, you just mentioned Chris Sale, they sold off most of their good pieces. They still got Jose Abreu, they've got 10 of the most promising 100 prospects in the minor leagues, but they're still trying to do things on the cheap. And it's not only led to basically almost, they won the series in 2006, a dozen years of futility, but they've got at least 4 seasons more ahead. And the other big problem compounding things for them is that the Cubs on the other side did their rebuild in roughly, 5 years, but they had Theo Epstein at the helm and unlimited cash. So you can't really compare the two. But, the fate of those two franchises tells you everything you need to know about the major leagues. Tom Ricketts, owner of the Cubs, is not only bankrolling, is not only got an ATM machine there, but he's basically taking a big chunks of real estate around the ballpark so that, like Fenway Park, you'll walk into basically what's Ricketts territory, and you'll probably have a card or a chip embedded in your forearm, and you'll basically walk around and eat and drink and watch a ball game and probably stay after the game and drink, and all of it will be run through, the Cubs organization. So if the Sox don't commit a large chunk of money, and I'm sure it's the same thing in Baltimore. It's not just money you got to spend it smartly, but you got to commit a huge amount of money in order to make something. And I'm talking about a franchise that contends consistently, because that's the only way to build a fan base in this day and age.
He is Jim Litke. He is with the Associated Press out in Chicago, but he kind of travels the world as an AP columnist. He's been my friend for a couple of decades and talking all things baseball. And I guess for baseball in this offseason with what felt collusion-y, what felt like they're trying to contain cost and do all of those things. I remember when the union punched back hard, and every year I go through it with guys like you about Marvin Miller not being in the Hall of Fame and what an outrage that is. But, certainly the pendulum swings all the time, player to owner. They all seem to make money generation to generation. And what gets left behind is, where's the fan base in all of this when the team goes into the tank and wants to charge top dollar to come out? I mean, in Baltimore, they're offering kids come free all year long, and people still aren't coming, Jim. And there's something about baseball and the pace of it. I know you're on the other side of 50. I'm entering that territory here coming up later on this year. Average age of a fan, 57 years old, Major League Baseball. I don't know what's going to stop it from becoming horse racing where it becomes something that's a niche sport, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they haven't been compensated like a niche sport, that's for sure. Not on my cable bill for the last 20 years anyway.
No, and the thing you got to keep in mind is that the guys on the other side of the team, the other side of the field, all have to get paid too. And so what you see is the same thing you see in horse racing. There's a certain number of people that are there just to be in the background, and they really don't have a chance. We knew coming out of spring training that there were probably a dozen clubs that weren't going to seriously contend. The problem is, and you were talking about the pendulum shifting, what happened is the Houston Astros went through a rebuild fairly quickly, and the Cubs went through a rebuild fairly quickly.
And the Yankees as well. Don't forget them. Remember, they were throwing the white flag up 18 months ago, right? And now they're about to coast to 100 wins, right?
Right, and let's remember what made the difference. Money. The thing is, you can look at how many little minor league teams are thriving in little communities right now because people will go out to a ball game. A, if the experience is good, and B, if they've got a team that they like. And the problem with Major League Baseball is that right now you've got a lot of teams that are using the Astros example as an excuse or the Cubs example as an excuse. They're pretending, look at what the Marlins offloaded in the offseason. And by the way, I think they're still doing better than both the Cubs and the Orioles. But, that's been everybody's argument right now. All the ownership's argument is we're rebuilding. And so, the fan bases are either going to have to suffer or go away. But as I said right at the start of this answer, so you got to have somebody else. The Yankees and the Cubs and all the good ball clubs have to have somebody to play against, and so you're going to be dragging along a certain number of teams that aren't contenders. The problem is it's becoming clearer and clearer every year by the way an organization comes out of spring training, and not just their record, because we pointed out the Sox have the worst record in major leagues. But who you've got on the roster and where you spent the money, and if you can't show your fans, some loyalty, and loyalty, unfortunately, we're talking about dollars spent, your fans are going to eventually turn away. Can you read? The thing is every owner is now thinking, not only can I flip this thing fairly quickly, but there's another big infusion of cash coming down the line, and we'll call this a segue. Gambling is going to become much more a part of every major league sport. The one place where baseball has shown some foresight, and just one more quick aside, you mentioned the average age. Well, we were saying 20 years ago, if these guys don't figure out a way to put some of these games on at night, if they don't have some community building efforts, that they are going to lose a generation, and they did. So they're all banking on the idea that there'll be an infusion of cash, and then somewhere down the line, they'll spend some of it. And yet, history shows us it's mostly the organizations that are spending money that treat everything like a first-class deal. We used to joke about media buffets. You could tell how good a ball club was by what kind of food they were serving. So a lot of these owners are thinking, they're very much in the short term. They're thinking, I'll offload as much debt and as much commitment to players as I can, and then I'll see if my GM can steal a little bit of money, can steal a little bit of player value by doing a lot of data research and coming up with a good ball club. Well, I've talked to Theo Epstein a lot, and I'll tell you, it's not just being smart, unfortunately. You still got to be able to take some big gambles. And the thing we said about the Yankees 20 years ago is still true. They're one of the few franchises that can afford to bury their mistakes. So they buy an expensive guy and he doesn't pan out, then they just go ahead and buy another guy if it's only one or two pieces. But we're talking Sox in Baltimore, they need 5, 6 starters, not starting pitchers, field position starters, and then they need 2 or 3 starters on top of that. there's only so many promising guys, and only so many of those guys are going to pan out. So it's, baseball is going to have to, they have a hard time actually getting a national telecast anymore. They can't draw money, and yet a lot of teams do really well in their local TV market. So the model that hasn't shaken out completely yet, but the one thing I can tell you that was always true, that's true now, will be true 20 years from now, 100 years from now, you got to spend some money to make some.
He is Jim Litke. He's with the Associated Press. His work appears on the front of our website many, many times. He is one of their league columnists there. He's headed off to the World Cup. And you've been talking about the gambling side of this and where this is. And I guess this is my first baseball gambling conversation because the whole thing sort of settled in last week around horse racing around here. I did a ton of horse racing, and I start to think about one of the things that could save baseball is the action of horse racing was 8, 10, 12 races a day every day. That was in the 1950s, right? And the action of football is every Sunday and pool cards and whatnot around where my dad worked at the Point and the steel mill and whatnot back in the 70s and 80s. We're now in, I guess, offshore where you can gamble on, what color the Queen's going to be wearing at a nuptial on Saturday morning out of Europe, where they take gambling a lot more seriously and it's a lot more embedded in the culture. But Jim, when you spend a week talking to horse racing people and they talk about gambling and Baffert talks about betting on his own horse and every reporter talks about going to a window and cashing a ticket and it's all discussed in that way, and then I bring on someone like Randy Moss last week or Kenny Mayne who have worked for NFL Network or ESPN where they've never ever been able to discuss on a radio show, on the air, on the internet, anything that's ever had anything to do with a point spread, and all that's about to go away. Baseball becomes something that on a summer night, if you got that gene in you that you have to pull the bandit or whatever, betting on whether the pitch is going to be a ball or a strike, who's going to get out of an inning, a lot of us bored in the ballpark, take names to say, everybody throws $1 in, first home run gets $25 or whatever it is to keep it interesting. Baseball would be one of those sports that would lend itself to wagering along the scope of getting action anytime, much more so than probably all the rest of these sports put together. That would be a hell of an angle for baseball, right?
Yes, except, keep in mind one thing. I think I'll say I'm generally neutral on betting. I let anybody do whatever they want. I don't personally bet a lot. I do bet a little bit on the horse races, and if legalized gambling comes along, I will probably bet on the Triple Crown races. I doubt I'm going to be doing much betting besides that. But the thing to keep in mind, most important about all this stuff, and it's going to fall in the background, and it's not going to be a problem until it blows up, are going to be prop bets. You're going to be able, if the states or the legal gambling operations are going to allow you to start betting on what you just mentioned. We used to bet in the press box. First guy to get a hit. If a guy goes 3 innings without a no-hitter, we used to have a no-hit pool. So the problem is anytime you've got an action that depends on one guy, will a guy go scoreless in an NBA quarter? Will a guy get 12 points in an NBA quarter? Anytime you can bet, you can make individual prop bets, you're going to be running into a lot of integrity questions. Part of the reason that the leagues claim they want to get in on the legal side of the gambling, and they've already been in, I think there's 6 states that have legislation either passed or ready to go. And MLB and NBA have been the most proactive among the sports leagues, even though football is the biggest, NFL football is the biggest draw for bettors. The one thing they've included in all their prospectuses is they say they're going to need some money to ramp up integrity efforts, to have more guys watching games. Funny thing is, we've got 2 decades of experience in the Nevada sports books because they've been running a legal operation, paying taxes, reporting income, all of that stuff. So they know faster than anybody, certainly than any authorities, when the line starts to get a little janky, when all of a sudden a big bet comes down and completely changes the line on any given event. So you've got some safeguards built in, but if they allow prop bets, and I'm talking again about individual prop bets where you can bet one guy does one thing, be really worried about that, because that's when you're going to start seeing, if a couple of pitches here and there don't make a difference, or again, a quarter in an NBA game starts to make a big difference, you're going to have trouble. Because look, think back last NFL season, I can think of 3 games right off the top of my head that ended really weird, including the NFC playoff game where Was it the Vikings had to come back on the field and kick a field goal, even though the game had basically already ended, and then they just took a knee because it was done. They had to come out of the locker room 3 or 4 minutes after a celebration. It had already gone out, and everybody's like, wow, well, what's that about? Well, there were people on both sides of that bet. I think it was 5.5 points, and the field goal meant that they paid the under as opposed to the over. So you're going to have a lot of situations where people are already skeptical, and now they're going to see this stuff, and they might have $20, $2,000 on a bet like that. It's going to make for a really unhappy fan base, in a lot of instances. So they better be careful how they implement all this stuff.
Jim Litke has been my friend for 2 decades. He is a columnist at the Associated Press out of Chicago. I actually called him because the Orioles are in Chicago all week, and we were commiserating about how awful all this is. I want to go back to one thing on the baseball side, and that's the Machado sweepstakes that's going on, and the Cubs role in that. And look, man, the Orioles are so mismanaged. Like I had Nick Cafardo on last week, who I'm sure you have a lot of respect for, out of the Boston Globe. There's no one here in Baltimore peeling back the onion of what the hell's going on here with Angelos not really running the team. You mentioned bad signings. They're saddled with Chris Davis and $130 million of money they owe him. And at the end of this year, Showalter, Duquette, Britton, Brock, Manny Machado, and Adam Jones all out of contract in the next 4 months. And they're a last-place team. They got a lot of issues going on here, but the biggest one is who pulls the trigger on dealing Manny Machado to get whatever the young haul is going to be. That's the part that has everyone scratching their head here, because this is not an organization with any track record other than the 5 minutes your pal Andy McPhail came in here from Chicago and ran the place and, acquired the Tillmans and the Adam Joneses and the Chris Davises the first time around. There's been no deft maneuvering here at all, and the word is Brady Anderson's running the place, which is bizarre.
Well, remember, the fish rots from the head. So, the point is, you got a bad owner and you got a dubious GM. You've got almost no chance of the rest of the body being, well. My guess is, I don't know the ins and outs in Baltimore enough to say that, but to know for sure. But my guess is there'll be a sell-off at the end of the season. There's, you're almost guaranteed with the kind of money and where they're going that they're going to just say, well, what's the difference if we start from, if the hole's 3 feet or 5.5 feet? It's not going to make a difference. The problem is when you give away that, when you have that kind of giveaway, what are you going to get for it? Well, we saw what the Sox got by emptying their cupboard. Sale brought, I think, Eloy Jimenez is one of the, I think it's Jimenez that they got in that deal. It was the top-ranked prospect in the minor leagues. That's worth taking a risk. The problem is you'll be taking 4 and 5 risks now because you've got known commodities. And, of all those guys, I don't know how many. Machado's the real gem, obviously. I'm not sure what the future value of any of those other guys is. Machado's got big upside, and he's going to draw the most money. So you see the first guy you give away or the last guy. Remember, the Sox held on to Sale way longer than anybody would have. If they'd been smart about rebuilding.
Yeah, they could have dealt him in the pennant race when he snipped the jersey in half, right? Like back in the day. Juan Moncada was the guy, though, and he doesn't feel to be a phenom. He just feels like a ball player. That was the name I heard being thrown around, that he was going to be something special. Not so far.
No, and again, that's the problem with prospects. There are lots of guys that come to you with real nice. The trick about any sport is that you got to almost be the best guy at every level you ever play at just to get to the major leagues. And so if you think about how many guys are cut out of the process by the time you get to the top minors, and then, AAA, let's say, and then you got to all of a sudden walk up, and these guys have all already been the best at every level they played at too. So, we see it in every sport. A guy can eat a place, guys eat up college football and they go into the NFL, and every guy's is faster. And it's a rude awakening. And, that's why they spend a fortune on the scouting services, and they still don't get it right, 3/4 of the time. But you look at the NFL draft, you go back and do a breakdown of how many guys in the top two rounds turn out to be reliable long-term starters, or even basically, justify the contract they wound up getting as rookies, and you'd be poor really quickly.
Well, Jimmy, that's the gift, right? The gift is, if you're Theo Epstein, can you pick ball players, and can you identify which ones to give $200 million to and which ones to not? Chris Davis, and that's the gift for Ozzie Newsome that makes him special and makes everybody that runs the Browns not so special, right? Or everybody that runs the Bears lately, quite frankly, right?
Yeah, because that the one way you can achieve a quick turnaround for less than top dollar is to basically catch a trend and then get out of either in front of it or figure out, in Epstein's case, he realized after the steroid era, basically, who knows how much baseball was cleaned up, but I'm just going to say a lot. And he realized it was going to be much harder to find hitting in the next couple of years, so he went and got Bryant. He made a trade to get Addison Russell for I can't remember who the pitcher was, Cup pitcher was, but he wasn't much. So Rizzo turned out to be a pleasant surprise. But he consistently went after guys that were not just contact hitters, but power hitters. And he prioritized those guys. And when he had 2, 3, 4 of them, then he went and filled in the rest of the pieces. So if in the NFL, if you're a guy that you catch him, probably, I don't want to say exactly the year, but I'm going to say somewhere in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, Belichick basically caught football going from a defensive game to an offensive game. He was the best defensive coach in the game, and then he realized with the rule changes, less chucks on the line on receivers, that they were trying to open up the passing game. He had luck into the best passer in football, for the last 20 years almost now. But the point is, he knew football was changing from a defensive game to an offensive game, and he started to structure his teams that way. And then again, he went after single free agent guys that could fill a specific need once he got his basics down right. So Epstein basically found a bunch of really good hitters. He got one or two pleasant. Jake Arrieta turned out to be a pleasant surprise. But, he went and got himself a couple of frontline starters that he paid for. John Lester, they paid for a year for John Lackey, who was, again, not a great, he was at the end of his career, but he ate up a lot of innings. So you got to be really, really smart with so much data out there to build a ball club these days and spend your money wisely. That's never changed. The guys that almost nobody ever does it on a shoestring budget. And even guys with money, they're still, if you're talking about 10 teams that are in contention most years in most sports, the guys that tend to be there all the time are the smartest guys like Belichick.
He is Jim Litke. He's one of the smartest guys. How many years you been doing this as an AP now? I mean, I wanted to say a couple of decades. I've only known about 20, but it's 30 or something, right, isn't it?
It's my 40th year.
Wow. Man, it's like a Rush concert when I came to Chicago, 40th anniversary. Jim Litke can be found out on Twitter as well as at the AP. And also, you're doing podcasts now. Tell me all about that because, clearly I podcast, I radiocast, I broadcast, I videocast, I do all of that. But you doing the radio thing, that's certainly something I'd be tuning into, right?
It came out of the blue. Podcast1.com, which is the biggest distributor in the country, came to me, and we're breaking out all their sports shows, Dan Patrick, Shaq, Rich Eisen, Jim Harbaugh, into a separate network, and he wanted a newsyear program to kind of tie the whole thing together. And so we started in January, brought it over to the AP. We started in January, and basically I do a weekly show called Podcast One Sports Now. It's available on podcast1.com, it's the plug, and Apple Podcasts. And then from some of the biggest special events of the year, we're going to be doing dailies. So in Korea at the Winter Olympics, I did 15 and 17 days, including Bodie Miller, who was doing skiing for NBC, but who I knew going back to the Turin Olympics when he was maybe the biggest Olympic bust in history. But, somebody had a relationship with almost 12 years at this point. So he came on to talk. I had Bob Baffert on 2 weeks ago, head of the Kentucky Derby, nailed it. And so, the nice thing is because I've been doing the sports columnist thing forever, I've got I sound like an old man now, but I got a Rolodex full. I don't really.
Well, it's been 40 years, Jim. Yes, I mean that. It's 33 for me, and the Rolodex is how I found you.
And guys have been great about coming on. I got Lance Armstrong on the 5th episode. He was terrific. We talked to Bob Costas. So it's been and I brought Tim Dahlberg, another AP columnist, on as a guest co-host during the Olympics. The banner worked out so well. We have arguments all the time anyway. We've been doing it for 20 years, so now we do it in front of a microphone. But, we get a great range of guests, and then we can always obviously pick up on the AP guys who are covering any event at pretty much any time. When the gambling story broke last week, it was literally Monday when we started to record. And, within a couple of minutes, my buddy Tim got Jimmy Vaccaro, the sportsbook legend, on. And then we got the AP guy, Ben Knuckles, who's been covering the Supreme Court case for, the last 6 months. And we're able to bring, I think, a lot of newsiness to topics. And yet, because I've been doing it so long, I can also grab the occasional, pretty good guest from guys I've done columns with over the past. And it's been a lot of fun. It's a little different, as you know, it's a little different medium, but, just like doing sporting news radio, except when we blow something, you can say, hey, stop the tape or edit that out. It works out pretty good.
Here's Jim Litke. That's Litke. You can find him out on Twitter. Last thing for your World Cup, obviously no U.S., no Italy. I am looking for an Iceland jersey, at least to wear for 3 games over the first couple of days over in Russia. I went to Germany. I love the World Cup. The only thing more corrupt than our current government here and this clown running our place is how Russia and how Qatar wind up getting things like this and drawing folks like you from across the world to something that obviously was bid on very, very corruptly. But here we go, and off to Russia you go, and the U.S. isn't even playing, which is an embarrassment and a stain on our soccerness. But, a chance to root for Iceland, certainly a chance to root for a bunch of underdogs. And Jim, it's on my calendar. I mean, these games are going to start at 6, 7, 8 in the morning here on the East Coast and go all day. It's going to be a wonderful couple of weeks for me in June with the Orioles battling between last place and 5th place. That's the same thing. To watch a bunch of soccer for a month. I love it. I really do.
Yeah, to me, it's maybe the best event in the world. I've been to a lot of them, and they never fail to entertain in ways that you never anticipate. I mean, I remember you were just talking about 2006 in Germany. The final when Zinedine Zidane, who's now the coach of Real Madrid, was playing still for France, and the Italian defender Marco Materazzi was apparently insulting him the whole game, and then right with the game on the line, he turns around and headbutts Materazzi, and the whole place is out there. I don't even remember what the capacity is in Olympia Stadion, but it was had to be upwards of 65,000-70,000 people. The place is going absolutely nuts. It's an event that takes over a country in a lot of ways. I mean, in the States, if you're in a town when there's a World Series or when you're at a Super Bowl location, that goes on for like 3-4 weeks. I mean, it ebbs and flows because, as you pointed out, an underdog like Iceland gets hot or the home team does really well. But it's a great kind of party atmosphere most of the time. Obviously, the World Cup's been marred by some really ugly fan fights the last couple of times around, but hopefully people will behave a little bit better, and I'm pretty sure the Russians will keep a tight clamp on things. But it's almost like a shared experience. Everybody is a little bit happier most of the time when you go to one of these events. And like I said, it's almost like a month-long party where there's something that everybody can talk about, whether you're sitting in a cafe or you're standing next to somebody about to cross the street. People have little, flags painted on their faces. It can be a fun event. What we should not forget is what you pointed out at the start, and really goes back to our whole conversation, or at least a lot of it, is that it takes a lot of money, and a lot of money is spent in World Cup bids in ways that, under the table. A lot we don't know about. The transparency isn't great, but man, if you want guys to put on a party, they do a hell of a job at it.
All you have to do is Google Chuck Blazer, and then you figure the rest out about how this whole thing came together. I'm sure that story will come back out. Hey, dude, be safe over there. Have a great time. Support the Germans. We have a German kid that saved my wife's life twice, so I'll have my Deutschland jersey on as well. And I'm sure Iceland will go out early, and I'll be rooting for Argentina and Messi and all that. So it's going to be a great month of soccer. I'll be following you, and I'll check in maybe when you get back. We'll talk some soccer, all right?
That sounds like a plan, and don't forget what I can't remember with the soccer writer who said it, but he goes, it's a game that's played by 22 men in shorts for 90 minutes, and then Germany wins.
Okay, well, if it works out that way, and that's where we are in the middle of July, I'll be okay with that. Give me more of a chance to wear my shirt longer.
There you go.
Take care of yourself. Jim Litke from the Associated Press. His work appears at WNST.net as well as on Twitter at Jim Litke. You can find me in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.